Good night and welcome to edulaw, the program that explores the intersection between education and law in the Caribbean. Our topic this evening is gender identity discrimination. We will first establish our legal framework. The Caribbean region can be described as one that is as diverse as it is similar. A common colonial heritage among territories has meant that similar practices, traditions, and values have long been observed. Among these is a value for education and formal schooling, a respect for the work and influence of the church and our religious community, and a deep appreciation for a distinctive Caribbean culture. Several of the constitutions of Caribbean island states provide a legal framework for governance and explore several issues, including citizenship and the rights and responsibilities of the individual. For example, Chapter 3 of the Barbados Constitution declares that every individual is entitled to fundamental rights and freedoms regardless of race, place of origin, political opinions, creed, or sex. At the same time, it explains, however, that these rights and freedoms are subject to respect for the individual rights and freedoms of others, especially within the context of public interest. Among these are the rights for life, liberty, and security of the person, the protection of the law and freedom of conscience, of expression, and of assembly and association. The St. Lucia Constitution also maintains similar rights and includes the rights to personal liberty, privacy, and protection from inhumane treatment. As in the Barbados Constitution, the inherent boundaries outlined are, in fact, limitations designed to ensure that the enjoyment of the said rights and freedoms by any person does not prejudice the rights and freedoms of others or the public interest. While in the Caribbean, our constitutions do not directly address the recently emerging issues of sexual orientation or transgenderism by name, they do suggest that all individuals with reference to sex have the right to enjoy certain freedoms, including the freedom to not be discriminated against. This raises questions, perhaps, of the need for some constitutional reforms to directly address the needs of transgenders as an emerging community with peculiar rights, or it may suggest a need to be intimately acquainted with how the current laws may be interpreted to include them. While the awareness of UN conventions and the prevalence of international legal reforms may be considered, the right to sovereignty among Caribbean states to furnish their own laws and practice their own social mores is also implicated in this context. It may be instructive, therefore, to note that the UN Human Rights Council in 2012 sought to investigate, dialogue, and document the issue of discrimination in LGBT communities across the globe by focusing on current discriminatory laws, practices, and acts of violence against the LGBT community. That dialogue and its findings may bear some relevance to the issue we will focus on today. It is on this premise and against this backdrop that this talk show will examine the legal issue of discrimination within the context of an educational institution, as that discrimination relates to the LGBT community. We will be examining the articulated concerns of a transgendered youth in a Caribbean school, as highlighted in the following scenario. It is hoped that this discussion will raise relevant questions that can provide a way forward for the resolution of such incidences in contemporary Caribbean society. Definition of terms. Transgenderism. Transgender people are individuals who have a gender identity or gender expression that differs from their assigned sex. Transgender people are sometimes called transsexual if they desire medical assistance to transition from one sex to the other. Gender identity. Gender identity describes the identification of individuals with one sex identity as a member of the other sex, or where people of indeterminate sex identify as a member of a particular sex. Individuals can do this by living or seeking to live as a member of a particular sex, or by assuming characteristics of a particular sex. This becomes evident in the way they dress, a name change, or medication intervention, such as hormone therapy or surgery. Discrimination. The unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people or things, especially on the grounds of race, age, or sex. Transgender discrimination is a common practice as transgender individuals experience discrimination in several areas of life, including not being recognized as their preferred gender and being forced to disclose private information. Our case scenario. A 15-year-old transgender male, whom we will call Kyle, has written a letter to his secondary school board in a Caribbean island, outlining his concerns as a consequence of his changed identity. Kyle, a Canadian student of West Indian parentage, who has spent the first 12 years in the Canadian school system, has been living in the Caribbean for the past 3 years. After his 14th birthday, Kyle claimed that he was tired of living a life and wanted, in his own terms, to come out and be his true self. He has therefore requested that his transgender status and profile, from male to female, be acknowledged by the school's administration. His transgender role identity has resulted in some changes in his appearance. These changes have included differences in hairstyle, in his style of dress and manner of speaking, as well as changes in his use of makeup. Because of his need to follow the school rules regarding the required attire for males, however, he has had to suppress what he defines as his true self. Outside of school, as a transgender male, he has felt free to explore this new identity and express himself in ways which he believes are in keeping with how he now defines himself. In school, however, he claims to be a victim of discrimination because he asserts that the school has failed to acknowledge and/or accept his transgendered identity. He feels harassed by the students, teachers, and to some degree by parents, all of whom express condemnation for his chosen lifestyle. Members of his class have also leveled threats at him. He particularly feels discriminated against by one of his teachers who regularly ignores him or puts him to stand at the door of the class for inappropriate behavior. Kyle believes that the intolerant culture of the school is affecting his well-being and his academic performance, and wishes to have this matter addressed by school authorities. To explore this issue from both a legal and ethical perspective, we have invited a competent group of panelists. Our guests in our virtual online studio tonight are Lisa Perez, the president of the PTA and a concerned parent of a child in Kyle's class, the principal of the school in question, Mr. Stephen O'Geist, and representing the UN Human Rights Council, Mr. Jonathan Bratt. Colleagues, welcome to edulaw, and I look forward to our having a robust and useful discussion on this contemporary issue. I am your host for this evening, Denise J. Charles. As we launch into our discussion tonight, we will direct our first question to our principal, Mr. Stephen O'Geist. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Do you think it is the role of the school to protect the rights of transgender students? And if so, how can this be done?
Thank you, Denise, and good evening to you. Good evening to the other distinguished members of the panel. Today's society is recognizing the experiences and needs of transgender people as never before. This trend is most evident in our nation's school, where an increasing number of transgender students attempt to live openly as their authentic selves. In the United States, the rights of transgender students are protected by a host of federal and state laws. Under federal law Title IX prohibits discrimination in schools on the basis of sex, which includes gender identity. The Constitution of Caribbean countries, however, do not protect persons of different sexual orientations or gender identity from discrimination, specifically because they are not named in the law. However, the current constitutions of many Caribbean countries do recognize that every person is entitled to all fundamental rights and freedom and protect them against discrimination based on sex, race, place of origin, political opinions, color, or creed. It must be noted that the Constitution has enshrined within it the principles of equality and non-discrimination of all persons. Every child has a right to an education, as stated in the Education Act of St. Lucia, 1999. Similar provisions have also been made in other Caribbean countries. In the Caribbean, we do not currently have laws which specifically address the issues of transgenderism. However, transgender students can gain protection since the Constitution makes provision for the equality and non-discrimination of all. The school has a responsibility to provide safe and supportive learning environments that respect every student. Every student has the right to learn in a safe and accepting school environment. Supporting transgender students give them the equal opportunity that all students need. As principal, I have the legal duty to make sure that the school is free from bullying, harassment, and discrimination. In addition, there is a duty to accommodate students who have particular needs in order to be able to participate equally with other students in the classroom. Hence, the school must have policies and procedures and support systems for accommodating all students who are different, including those who may be transgender. Fair and respectful school environment helps all students learn. Preventing harassment and discrimination is not a new and separate responsibility. It is part of the activities that schools already engage in, such as developing and implementing school safety plans, ensuring compliance with education equity requirements, informing students and parents about rules of conduct and enforcing these rules, providing staff development programs for teachers to learn skills needed to maintain a safe and fair classroom, and preparing students for adult life in a diverse society. Moreover, making schools safe for all students is consistent with the goals of improving their scores, as students cannot focus on tests when they are worried about their safety.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Lisa Perez, you have been elected to the executive of the PTA for the years 2015 to 2017, and you're also the parent of a child in Kyle's class. Do you feel that Kyle's assertion of his own rights as a transgendered youth has somehow encroached on your own rights as a parent with respect to your expectations for the school?
Good night, Denise. Thank you for having me on your talk show tonight. Also, good night to my fellow panelists, Mr. Geese and Mr. Brax. I have listened to the principal and the letter from Kyle. As a parent, I am concerned about how the management of the school has communicated to parents and students that a transgender student is attending the school. Initially, the PTA felt that it was not necessary for the entire school to know that this had occurred, as this could present a safety issue for Kyle in terms of bullying, which can lead to violence. On the other hand, if Kyle wants his transgender identity to be publicly known, is he really mature enough to handle the consequences? He has already expressed that he has received threats. Denise, it has created confusion in the minds of our students and an identity crisis among the girls of the school. I have had many parents calling me saying that their daughters are confused and distressed. We have taught our children that God made them in his own image, that is, either male or female. We believe that the school administration have not thought through the ramifications of this process. Parents have expressed to me that they were not prepared to address questions from their children at this time on identity and human sexuality. It was unfair to impose this situation on the entire student body. We would have liked was for only the principal and teachers that are directly involved with Kyle to have dealt with this issue privately first, before it was thrown before the entire body. You must remember that our Caribbean society is a very homophobic one.
Lisa, thanks so much for voicing your concerns and those of parents like yourself. Mr. Black, you've done extensive work with the UN's Human Rights Council on issues of discrimination against LGBT communities across the globe. Can you articulate to us the perspective of the Council on the rights of transgender individuals as this would relate to an educational institution and to students?
Thank you, Denise, for the question and opportunity to address the issue tonight on your show. The position of the UN's Human Rights Council regarding this issue was perhaps best articulated on March the 7th, 2012 by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon during a meeting with the member states when he stated that while sexual orientation and gender identity are sensitive issues that were previously taboo subjects, it is our responsibility to speak out because lives are at stake, and it is the duty of individuals to protect the rights of everyone, everywhere. To those who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, let me say that you are not alone. That is, your struggle for an end to violence and discrimination is essentially a universal and shared struggle. It is the position of the United Nations that any attack on transgender individuals is an attack on the universal values of the United Nations and its member states. As far as an educational institution is concerned, the legal obligations of schools to safeguard the human rights of all children are well established in international human rights law. In other words, international human rights standards recognize the diversity of humankind and explicitly protect the rights of marginalized groups such as trans people.
Thanks, Mr. Brack, for your perspective. I would be interested, however, in hearing you discuss the legal or ethical basis for this particular position which you have advanced.
The core legal obligations with respect to protecting the human rights of transgender individuals are essentially centered around the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, specifically outlined in Articles 7, 19, and 26. Article 7 states that all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. Article 19 proclaims that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression without fear of victimization or persecution. And finally, Article 26 proclaims that everyone has the right to education and that education should be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. Moreover, education should promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial, or religious groups, and should further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. As far as the legal precedence is concerned, in May 2016, the United States Justice and Education Departments, under the direction of President Barack Obama, issued guidance that public schools must allow transgender students to use bathrooms, locker rooms, and other intimate facilities of their choice, rather than those matching their gender assigned at birth.
Jonathan, thank you so much for that UN and international perspective, even while we remain cognizant of our own rights as a Caribbean region to maintain some sovereignty with respect to the positions we choose to take on these issues. This next question is again directed to our school principal. Stephen, with all that has been shared so far, what policies or protocols can your school implement to ensure that no child is discriminated against?
Before we can look at emerging a school policy against discrimination, we must first demonstrate an understanding of what legal rights or protections are currently offered under the law. For example, a student who has been identified as transgender still has the same legal rights or protection afforded to all students. The principal and teachers owe every student a duty of care. A school is prohibited from discriminating against a student on gender grounds. Therefore, a school should not deny transgender admission or access to facility. As educators, however, we have to be aware and acknowledge the high rate of discrimination and harassment suffered by transgender students. According to the National Center for Transgender Equality and the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force 2011 in the United States, Students who express a transgender identity or gender nonconformity while in grade K to 12 reported alarming rates of harassment. 78% harassment, physical assault 35%, and sexual violence 12%. Harassment was so severe that it led almost 1/6 or 15% to leave a school in K to 12, set in a K to 12 setting or a higher education. Schools therefore recognize that discrimination often affects transgender and gender students in particular ways that prevent them from fully participating in the school environment and impacts their ability to learn. Discrimination can take many forms, such as ignoring or failing to respond to ongoing bullying and harassment, holding the student to strict or unreasonable application of a school dress code that results in discipline and may prevent them from attending class, preventing students from using appropriate restrooms, harassment by teachers and staff, and even expulsion. Schools therefore should ensure that certain policies and procedures are in place for accommodating both transgender and gender non-conforming students without resorting to these forms of discrimination. These policies and procedures must cover conduct that takes place in the school, on school property, and at all school-sponsored functions and activities. The main purpose of such policy is to foster an educational environment that is safe and free from discrimination for all students, regardless of sex, sexual orientation, gender, or gender expression. To answer your question more specifically, the following policies and procedures will therefore be enforced at my school. All teachers must act as protective agents committed to safety and well-being of students, including those who are transgender. Discrimination, bullying and harassment on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity or expression shall be prohibited within the school. If the school is aware of complaints alleging discrimination or harassment based on a person's actual or perceived gender identity or expression, immediate action will be taken by the school administration to remedy the situation. Counseling will be provided to all students involved in incidents of bullying and harassment. Teachers will be expected to model non-discriminatory behavior. The school will seek to promote an inclusive, child-friendly environment by outlining and acknowledging best practices. The school will ensure equal access to all school facilities and equal participation in school activities by making clear that all students have the right to be treated fairly regardless of their gender identity. The school shall maintain students' records that include original legal name and gender. However, if the school is not legally required to use a student's legal name and gender on certain documents, the school shall use the name and gender preferred by the student. The school will change a student's official record to reflect a change in legal name or gender upon receipt of documentation that such change has been made pursuant to a court order or supporting legal documents such as a deed poll. All information pertaining to students will remain confidential. In the event that some students are uncomfortable with using shared bathroom facilities, transgender students, students with disabilities or other physical differences, students who are reluctant to use facilities alongside a transgender student or other student, the school will make provision upon a written request from the parent for the use of safe alternative, for example, an office bathroom, if such request is deemed reasonable.
Lisa, bearing in mind the position of the UN Council and the principal in terms of acceding to some of the needs or requests of transgender students, what other critical concerns do you want to express on behalf of the parent body?
Denise, I have listened carefully to my colleagues. They have outlined many laws and policies that support the transgender child. However, after calling an emergency PTA meeting where 85% of parents attended, these were the concerns raised. The possible influence of this child's orientation on our children, the challenge of this to our moral, spiritual, and social values, which as parents we have tried to pass on to our children. Is this the new norm of the school? Are our children ready to handle the societal pressures of being or not being friends with Kyle? The bathroom and changing room issue, which would be critical areas of concern. Denise, approximately 30% of parents expressed to us that they were willing to move their children from the school if this issue persisted, and we were even willing to picket the Ministry of Education.
Lisa, I understand your passion and your concerns as a parent, but we must also be aware of the international human rights conventions which exist and which should guide our emerging policies. We must also understand that parents, principals, and teachers are required by law to exercise the same courtesies to all students as stipulated by our constitutions across the Caribbean, regardless of differences. If each of you could have a brief takeaway with respect to our discussion this evening that sums up your position on this issue, what would it be? We will begin with our principal and then move over to our PTA representative, Lisa. Stephen, what's your position, your final word?
The issues related to transgender student rights are emergent and complex. Discrimination often affects transgender and gender non-conforming students in particular ways that prevent them from fully participating in the school environment and impacts their ability to learn. Every student has a right to learn in a safe and accepting school environment. The school, as a major institution of socialization, must communicate and send the right signals to everyone in society. It is imperative that we prevent all forms of discrimination against all students and provide all students with equal opportunity to make meaningful contribution to the development of society. Thank you.
As you ask us to respect the rights of this child, please remember that you must also respect our rights as parents to parent our children in the way we see fit. We do acknowledge that discrimination is illegal, but we must emphasize that according to our Constitution, the rights of others should not be infringed on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen and Lisa. Jonathan, would you care to share your parting comments with us on this discussion?
It is important to reflect on the fact that transgender people are our neighbors, co-workers, friends, and family. And when it comes to human rights and the freedom to earn a living, having food or shelter, or being served by a government institution such as a school, it is imperative that these individuals be treated equally without having to be fearful of any form of discrimination. While each of us may have different beliefs, it is often pertinent to think about our commonalities, as we are all human beings who expect and deserve to be treated equally under the law with dignity and respect in a world that is welcoming and accepting of differences. With respect to opposing views, freedom of religion is one of the most fundamental human rights which is protected via various forms of legislation throughout the world. However, religious freedom does not entitle anyone the power to discriminate or treat others unjustly. That is, the issue is really about striking a fair and equitable balance which can assume the form of continuing to uphold and preserve the rights of religious organizations while updating existing legislation to protect the rights of transgender people. To put it succinctly, within the educational system, many transgender individuals are harassed and mistreated with reported negative effects on both victim and the school's population in general. All too frequently, transgender students report fear and anxiety about using restrooms and locker rooms at school because they experience harassment by both peers and adults when using them. As such, there is no logical reason why individuals such as Kyle should be victimized because they were born as one gender and now identify as another. Moreover, transgender individuals are not a threat to society as some here on the panel might suggest, but are human beings simply wishing to live in the world just like everyone else.
Thank you, Jonathan, for putting it so succinctly. Our discussion this evening has been exploring the issue of gender identity discrimination. We have had as our guests school principal, Mr. Stephen Ogis, PTA rep and concerned parent, Lisa Perez, and from the UN's Human Rights Council, Mr. Jonathan Bratt. We can perhaps all agree that each student matters and has the right to experience a harassment-free education. We are also aware of global trends in terms of the openness with regards to diverse sexualities. While we maintain the right as Caribbean territories to hold to our social mores and customs and our rights of conscience, we can still perhaps all agree that every human being has the inherent right to be respected. In the context of schooling, this also secures their right to a quality education, which would facilitate both their emotional and academic development. Schools must therefore play their part in ensuring that all students, irrespective of differences, are respected. This is critical preparation for them to live in and work in a globalized and diverse environment. Thank you so much for joining me tonight for EduLaw, our online talk show. I've been your host, Denise J. Charles. Good evening.